the green chain. The drying kilns back here, storage sheds here, an outdoor area where they stored lumber. All this is stored lumber out here. Here again, here's the power plant. And of course, you see the smokestack. Here's some different equipment and the bandsaw in the mill. There's a huge crane that went on these tracks. I guess it would transfer lumber from one area to the other. And you see them unloading some logs down here. So they had two ways of unloading logs. They unloaded them right against the shoreline of the mill pond, but then they also had this track that went out in the middle of the log pond like we have in the logging area at our club. This is the interior of one of the factories. This made plywood. You can see they've cut these logs to a length and they put them on these machines that basically shave it into little thin pieces. On the fire trains. I had this picture, I didn't realize what it was at first until I really started looking at it. And I realized they're actually putting out some kind of fire here. Another one of their steam engines. This is one of their locomotive shops. I'm not sure this particular one was located in Westwood. It's not identified. It might have been located in their facility in Susanville. One of Fruit Grower's steam engines. So my dad worked for Fruit Grower Supply Company, which was a division of Sunkist Growers. And they purchased Westwood in 1944. The main reason is they were running out of lumber to feed their Susanville operation, and they needed wood to make their wooden fruit boxes for all their growers.
Oh, I see.
In order to get those stands of wood, they had to buy the town. They had to buy everything from Red River. Red River wouldn't just sell them the timber stands. Said, if you buy this, you got to buy Westwood, you got to buy the mill, you got to buy everything. So they kind of reluctantly did it because they needed the timber. They never really wanted this town and the mill. So my dad had started with the company in Los Angeles, and they transferred him up here to be their bookkeeper. So this is inside the box making factory where they made the boxes. And you see over here, they've got ends of the boxes that are cut down and stacked and that sort of thing. This is kind of what they would produce. They would produce all the pieces to this, and then the pieces were crated and sent off to the growers who had machines that would actually assemble these things for them. And then, so they were assembled on the site wherever they did the fruit packing. They weren't assembled at the lumber town here. There's another view of that skating rink. The mill was closed in 1956. The company transitioned to cardboard for their fruit boxes. They no longer needed this operation, and they frankly, they wanted to get rid of this really white elephant, the whole town and the thing here. The production buildings were dismantled, the equipment and wood were sold off. The entire town, lock, stock, and barrel, was sold to developers who hoped to create a recreational community. Unfortunately, this place was really too far from anything, and it just never went. So the whole thing that got me into this is I've been fascinated with this town ever since I lived there, and as I've grown up, and it's kind of been lost to history, to recreate the lumber mill and buildings in 3D digital format. So I got this idea back in 2013, I think. Look at all that wood there. So I started doing research, and these are the different areas that I look to do my research, and I'm going to be going through each one of them. So the Eastman collection is a group of photographs shot by this photographer named Eastman, and all the negatives and everything have been donated to the UC Davis archives. So I was able to get high-res pictures of a lot of stuff. Like the picture you're looking at here is a very high-res image where I can zoom in on it and I can see detail. So I talked to them and they gave me a great deal on purchasing this, and so I'm kind of using it for a nonprofit type of project. You see this sawmill sawdust pile here I was telling you, it made Ripley's, believe it or not, for the largest sawdust pile in the world. Here's some of their shops. They worked on locos and things like this, and cars and stuff, you know, doing repair. Power plant again. Here's the main sawmill here. These are all the drying kilns they had. The green chain came right off of the sawmill here. It went into this area they call the stackers, where after they had already sorted the timber and lumber over here that's cut, they brought it over here and stacked them up with spacers between it so that they could air dry it, you know, so air could get in between it, and then they would transfer it over and put it into, and they would go through these dry kilns and come out the back end here. If anybody has any questions, chime up or whatever. So this is the sort of the backside of those dry kilns here. Looking back over towards the sawmill, which is here, power plant. You can see the theater popping up over here because it was fairly tall. This is where they made the plywood. So they would take the logs in here, bring them in, cut them, put them on that machine that would deal, and it went through this. This is 1,000 feet long, this particular building, by I think 100 or 200 feet wide. And again, you can see the train yards right here coming in. The station would be up right off to the left here. All these are little housing for workers.
And the trestle going out over the log pond, right?
Yeah, that's that trestle I was telling you about. That it's very similar to the one we have on the layout at the club. And they replaced that side dumping, which you saw in that older picture. They would bring them in before and dump the logs off the side somewhere along here. I'm not sure exactly where they did it, and they changed it, and they did all the log dumping off of the trestle here, unloading. So Google Maps was another research device I used. Gives you an accurate picture of the roads and everything. The original mill was built over here in what they called back then Old Town. Today it's actually called Pine Town. And the log pond was right in here, and the whole lumber operations through here. Here's a satellite view of that. And what's interesting is the time these satellite pictures were taken, you could still see the foundations of a lot of the buildings that were located there. This is that plywood making plant here. And here would the office would have been located right here. Here's a close-up of some of the storage sheds. You can still see the little concrete foundations here. Actually, if you look at this, you can see where the railroad tracks were embedded in this at one time. It's pretty interesting because if they took the satellite over there today, you wouldn't see any of this because it's all overgrown. So I was very fortunate to have got onto this and done the screen captures of this before it got overgrown. Of course, they don't bother to fly over and shoot new pictures of this because it's such a small area in terms of use or whatever. So here's a geological survey map that I pieced together. These come in like blocks, you know, for whatever the little sections are. So I put that together, kind of get an idea. It gives you a good idea of scale because it actually has real scale on it.
Mm-hmm. Hey, Tim, what is the town? How does it survive? What, industry now, or how do they live there?
People still live there. It's kind of a retirement town. The population is less than 1,500 now, and you know, some houses are okay. A lot of stuff is run down. There's like a little mini mart gas station there. There's no real services there. You know, there's no medical services there. There's a little fire department they have, but that's about it. You know, no real type of stores and things.
Yeah.
So this I got from the surveyor's office. I'm sorry?
Do you know what happened to the log pond? Did it get drained or filled in, or?
Yeah, it basically got drained. You know, it was dammed originally with, you know, not
so
very
they
high levees to create
they
it, because
just-
there's a little creek called Robbers Creek that goes through there.
Yeah,
You can see Robbers Creek right here.
Yeah.
That's what they used to, and they you know, sort of built a dam around it here, and it's never really very deep. I don't know how deep actually. A few people drowned in it over the years, but so I guess they just broke that open and let the creek resume its normal flow into the Mountain Meadows Reservoir. This is a huge reservoir down here. So again, you can see this is where the store is, the office, the mill, all the drying areas out here. They would just bring things out on those little rail cars and stack all the lumber outside after they went through the drying kilns. So I found this interesting little guide that gave me an idea of pretty much what everything was at the Westwood Museum. They have a little tiny museum there. It's volunteer operated. And here's an early picture of the mill itself. And again, a very unique design. Even the fact that this second story overhangs this first story is kind of unusual. And you can see where the Robbers Creek is still flowing through here, even though they've got the mill pond over here. Later on, they totally blocked that off because they filled up this whole area with buildings eventually.
was the mill under construction there? Or is
Yeah, I
that just
think
the way
it
that
was,
the
it was
roof looked?
fairly well built, but yeah, you see a lot of the materials left around. Again, this is very early, probably 1915 to 1918, this picture here.
Yeah, it's just that the roof looks like it's just rafters or something with no actual roof on it.
Yeah, it actually does have a roof on it. You can see the paper here. It had to be a very complex thing to build this roof shape. They did a lot of weird things like that. They spent a lot of money on stuff that was kind of unusual. So here was the entrance a little bit later on here. You can see the Red River Lumber Company name here. And of course, the Red River's icon or mascot sort of was Paul Bunyan. They latched onto him and used him as their kind of company mascot for all intents and purposes. So this is another interesting.
Tim,
Yeah.
which way were those windows facing in that assembly of windows?
North. This face is north. So this is the north side. This is the west side.
Faces north, or
Say again.
is the picture facing north, or is the view that we're seeing the north side of the building?
Okay, so the view we're seeing here, can you see my,
Yeah.
Yeah.
this side of the building is west. This side of the building here is north. So we're looking at it northwest, almost at a 45-degree angle, kind of. So we're looking from the northwest, okay? So we're looking southeast in essence. This is the north side of the building. That's the west side of the building.
Well, I guess that would keep the heat down, but
Yeah, they were able to open it up in the summer to keep it cooler and, you know, let some air through there. But I bet you it was kind of cold in the winter. So this is a fruit grower's map from 1945. And, you know, they've roughed in all the buildings and stuff like that. And you see the pond, the log pond up here. This is the plywood making part. They made boxes. This is a box factory. These are storage sheds here, all this here. This is part of the sorting chain, drying kilns in through here, sawmill. Can you guys see my cursor okay?
Yeah.
Okay, and the power plant, company office. That big store that I told you is located right here. You can see how huge it is. Takes up the better part of a block. Elementary school was here. This is something else I found in the museum. You know, some plans of the boiler. And I copied this so that I'd give an idea of some of the scale on these buildings. I also contacted Sunkist. For a while, I had a person there who I was working with, and Sunkist was moving from one facility to another up in, I forgot where it was, from the valley to another part in the valley. And so they couldn't help me at the time because they were packing things up and everything. And by the time they moved and everything, this person quit or moved to another job and wasn't there any longer. And then I called other people, and nobody knows about their archives. So they have archives somewhere that could help me, but I don't know how to find the people that can tell me where they are and whether I can see them.
Tim,
Yeah.
Lloyd will refresh my memory. We visited a train layout down south, and they are big into StarKist, huge layout. And they have a lot of their buildings and reproduced a lot of the StarKist company there. So I believe if you need archival information, they may have it. Lloyd,
Okay.
the name of that train club?
Let me talk to you like tomorrow about that, okay?
Okay.
So the other thing is I contacted the Walker Museum. They have a big museum back in Minneapolis, Minnesota with a lot of the company archives. They have very little from this. Apparently they sold this. They sold everything that went with it, you know, whatever plans, architects, things, this and that. And so, you know, I actually talked to people back there, and no, they didn't have any type of thing that would help me with this project. In fact, the museum mostly houses art collection of this founder guy, T.B. Walker. He sent his sons out. He was fairly old by the time they started this out here, and his sons, 4 sons, ran the different aspects of the company. I also found all these books about it. Lloyd, this is by Tim Purdy. Remember, you mentioned him to me a while back, and I've actually know him personally, and I've had lunch with him up there, and I bought his books. His books are really pretty informative. It really covers this whole time in history in that particular era.
Do you have Robert Half's Red River book?
Right there.
Yeah. If anybody wants to borrow it, I've got a copy.
So yeah, when you showed me that, I went out online and got my own copy. So things I've been dealing with to make this happen, the obstacles have come up again, and of course this lack of existing architectural plans and lack of eye-level reference images. Most of the images I have are aerial view images, which I've only shown you a few of those, but there's very little pictures of these different buildings like the box plant and this plant from eye level. So when I started this, I had to decide, okay, what kind of scale, what time period, because this place changed. You can see in that early picture from the mill being by itself there kind of, to the later pictures where there's buildings everywhere, organizing it, creating sketches, working with Google Maps and other visual references, and model builders. So first, scale. I originally considered I'd like to actually build this thing, and then I started scaling it out based on those scales and found out, well, it would take so much space, it wouldn't even fit in my garage, much less my house. So HO scale, it would take 35.5 feet by 46 feet just to do that whole mill area if you were doing it, you know, in the exact scale.
That's about the size of my layout.
So
Yeah.
it would take that amount of space, which I don't have. And at that point in time, I realized I can't build this. I'm going to have to do it digitally, you know, recreate it in 3D. So that's when I kind of changed gears on what I was going to do with it in terms of that. So, and the time period, because so many changes have happened in this thing over a period of time, I settled on a later time period because there's the most photos available, and it was closer to the time I lived there also. Again, there's the mill right over here. The logs go right in here up this ramp with the chain thing that pulls them up and pulls them in. They have like a cutoff saw here to, I guess, trim the lengths of some of these saws. They do it right in the water, and this blade would go right down into the water and shoot water everywhere. I've seen some pictures like that. So part of the problem here is you've got to organize everything. So I gave every building that I knew about a number, and if I knew what it was, I gave it a name. So right in the middle, you have the mill. So Sawmill up here in the legend. So everything's marked. And I did some rough plans of, based on things that existed where all the buildings are. So I created a folder for each building, and I started creating sketches based on those aerial views. And this is what I would do based on that. And I would kind of get a rough proportion. These aren't measured or anything like that. And then I would draw the different views. This is a top view of the power plant, a north elevation, the west and south elevations, east. And then as I would come across information, I would write information down on these sheets and where I got that information so I could find it again. And then occasionally I would say, I want to see what this looks like, and I would draw up an isometric and put the different views together. So Google Maps, this has been very helpful overall in this thing. So I did a lot of screen captures. I have a very large 25-inch iMac here, and I can zoom in on stuff, and then I can take a high resolution screen image of that, and then I can piece all those things together in Photoshop to create one image. And so that's what's done here, taking multiple squares that I zoomed in on. And that also allows me to look at them later and zoom in real close for detail. You can also measure on Google Maps, and I found this out quite by accident, and I don't know where I came across this. I found out that actually if you right-click on Google Maps, you'll get a starting point of a measuring. So for instance, I'd go up here, I'd right-click, and then I would just drag it down here and click again. And I would get a measurement and come up 250 feet. This is the mill, the foundation of the mill. And you can see this was a shoreline of the log pond. The power plant was here. Unfortunately, a lot of it's covered, and it's hard to get a good idea of the footprint because it's already overgrown. And when you do this, a little window pops up and also gives you it in writing down here, total distance 250 feet for this measurement. Now, you can keep going. You can not just measure this way, then you could click over here, you could click up here, click over there. But I found it was easier for me to take just one measurement at a time and then compile these in a file. So I have files of these. I have each of these different little things measured out. And like here's doing the horizontal or the width across this. So it's a great little feature. Most people don't even know it's there. So then these different visual references I've created, you can start putting them together, one on top of another. So you can see this is overlaid on that U.S. Geographical Survey map with the town plot. You can see all the railroad lines I've drawn in here. You can put it over a satellite image of Google. So I went to a lot of different clubs. Oops, let me go back. A lot of different clubs. And in fact, that's how I got to your guys' club, looking for people to talk to see if they had any building experience, whatever, that they could look at photos and help me determine some of the heights of these buildings. So I visited every club in Southern California, went to some of the shows and talked to people and stuff. And so I ended up joining LAMRS. And this is one of my favorite pictures because it reminds me of the trestle up in Westwood. So this was my test project for 3D modeling, was my childhood home. So when my wife and I visited Westwood in 2014, the house was open. There was a guy who was working in there, and we went in and I told him who I was, and actually had pictures of on my phone of myself at the house back in 1950s. And so he was real nice, said, come in, do whatever you want. The house was empty. It belonged to his brother. He was doing some work on it. And so we took pictures. And here's an interior of this sort of kitchenette area today. This is that same set of cabinets here at my younger brother's 3rd birthday, I think. That would be about 1953, maybe. And here's some pictures looking from the living room down here to the dining room into the kitchen. This was the larger bedroom that myself and my 3 brothers occupy this room. This cabinet is movable. It's a closed cabinet, and it's turns out my dad built this. I didn't even know it when I was there, but my older brother said, when I got back and showed him these pictures, he says, hey, Dad built that. And he put it in the middle of the room, and the 2 older brothers were on one side and 2 younger brothers on the other. And you could open this from both sides, and we'd keep our clothes in there and stuff. So we did as many measurements as we could in the time that we had. I turned them into architectural drawings using Adobe Illustrator. And even all the placement of the trees, I was able to look at all these photos that we had of the property back then and determine that there were actually that many trees on the property. These are the different elevations of it. I did interior views of each of the different rooms. And then I started turning that into a 3D model. And I started with this program Strata 3D, and it took me a long time to kind of get a grasp of it. And it was kind of cumbersome in a way for this type of project. So I decided I would try something else. And I went to SketchUp Pro. And I was able to make much more progress in SketchUp Pro in a lot less time. And so this is what I was able to do in SketchUp Pro. This is that same house. That's the front view that faces west. And it's interesting in SketchUp Pro, you can actually geolocate this on a map to where it'll plop this particular, whatever your house or whatever your deal is, you can place it right down on its actual location. And so you can see what the sunlight looks like at different times of year. This is March 31st, 2:30 in the afternoon. This is what the sun would look like on that place, the shadows. This is the rear view of the house, same time of day. These are interior views I created in the same program. These are not photos, these are 3D computerized models. And you can do some interesting things with it. You can create, you know, like a walk around like this, animations. You can actually see in through the windows there as you're going around. What you're seeing below here, this is the basement area. You can see the basement window right there. I did not put sides on this because I wanted to kind of keep it open on the earth part of it here. And there's some other things you can do, and this was just sort of for fun. I haven't quite got this down how I'd like it yet, but you kind of get the idea. You can go through the different sections, cross-section of the house. And so then I built a foam core model of the house using those same architectural drawings I showed you earlier, you know, the side views from the different elevations. I brought this into the club once. I don't know if, I don't remember who was there when I brought it in. But you can take off the roof. You can see into the attic. It had this attic section in here. that we used to use when we had guests come in and stuff. Then here's all the interior. This is the front of the house here, the entryway. This was the kids' bedroom, and you can see I put the little cabinet right back in the middle where it was. Bathroom, my folks' bedroom, living room, dining room, kitchen, kitchenette, sort of breakfast room back here. And this is the stairway going up. So I've still got a long way to go on this project. I've barely scratched the surface, really. So in SketchUp Pro, I've actually measured out based on those foundations of things and laid in the plan view of most of the buildings at this particular time. So I've also begun to rough in some of the shapes. These are the dry kilns again. They had 3 huge blocks of these. This is storage shed back here. And off in the distance is lumber over here to the right, and the log stacks that will go all along the side of the mill pond. They would stack logs up all summer, so they had lumber to work with in the winter when they couldn't log. So here's a few rough views of just the basic shapes of this plugged in. You know, I don't have the windows in this or the doors or any of the texture wood yet. I'm just kind of getting a feel for the structure and that sort of thing. So basically I have a lot to do. I still need a lot of help with stuff. Things like how to determine building heights. I've been making more progress on that as things go. Eye-level images, architectural plans, reference photos, contact people, and anything I haven't thought of yet. So again, this particular slide was geared towards that presentation I did in Reno, where I was asking people who actually lived there, you know, what do you have in your collection or this or that you might be able to help me with this. I got about 4 or 5 people who replied. I didn't get a lot of stuff, but I did get some.
Tim?
Yeah.
Do you actually have the date and time of day of these pictures? I know that's extreme, but some photographers would do.
No, I don't. Most of them have a year on them, but that's about it.
Because I was thinking if you could try from the shadow length to figure out.
Yeah, so somebody had mentioned that to me, but unfortunately, I can tell from some of the photos, okay, this is taken sometime in the morning or sometime in the afternoon because
Right.
I know where things face, but it would totally be a guess. So there's not that,
Right.
you know, people didn't document that stuff like they do now. So,
Hey, Tim.
yeah.
So one of the easiest ways to do that is to find a doorway, because pretty much for as long as I'm aware, most doors were 80 inches. You might be off a few inches, but if you can find a doorway, it's almost always 80, and you can use that to then and in most architecture, most of the tops of windows are at the height of the door.
Mm-hmm.
And one, that's aesthetically pleasing, but 2, the beam that goes usually over the windows is usually in the same line as the beam that goes over
Those are the door.
the
Yeah, I
door.
found that to be true in the house that I did. In a lot of these industrial buildings, they have. You saw the Sawmill and how big those windows are. They're practically floor to ceiling type windows, but they
Yeah.
do have doors. And you know, like the other thing is there a standard kind of shed type door they used on this, you know, back then to load the railroad cars and stuff like that? Because there's several instances of that you'll see in some of them where they have those big doors they open up, and you know, they haul the lumber right out onto the platform and slide it right into the box car
Right.
and stuff.
Well, you've got box cars, and the height of those is pretty well documented.
I did find some information on that, and that actually kind of helped me create, okay, this platform outside here is so high because it's got to be high enough to be level with that boxcar door. So I'm kind of working my way through that, but it is fairly complex still. So
Yeah, that would be. Along the lines of extrapolating from shadow lengths, if you know we know you can find the height of the boxcar and then measure the shadow that's next to it and compare, come up with a dimension from that.
Oh, that's a good thought too. I hadn't thought about that. So
The other thing I was kind of thinking about, but this would be a lot harder, I think, would be look like most of these things had some sort of car or something parked next to them. You could identify the car and then get a dimension on the car, like how high is the roof on the car, and then might be able to do some extrapolation from that.
the cars are just in the town. Unfortunately, they're not in the mill area, but
Right.
yeah. So this is the last overview of the town again. You can see the theater back here. What was the Opera House rink here? They provided all these facilities for the workers. They had these lunch clubs and everything. This is that store I was telling you about. It goes all the way here. Office being over to the left. Again, the main entrance here. The loco sheds and working areas in here. It's a fascinating place. So it's captured my imagination, and I hope to be able to finish this before I die.
Well, Tim,
So
this is really, really amazing. I was actually trying to comment on the 3D modeling that you did of the house, but I was on mute. And so by the time I got it off of mute, you already had moved on to the next point. But the 3D modeling work was amazing.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. I've learned a lot kind of the hard way, but I'm getting there. So is there anything else, you guys, or do you want me to go back anything, or?
Yeah, Tim, the store, was that owned by the company? The company
Everything.
owned everything?
Everything you see here was owned by the company. The only thing the company didn't own is it donated land for the churches. And, at that point in time, the churches owned that land and those buildings. And a lot of times the company donated the lumber for it, and the church people would get their own people to design and build it or whatever, and they would provide the labor. The church would provide the labor, but the company did donate land for the different churches. There were 4 or 5 churches in town.
Tennessee Ernie had a song, "Oh My Soul to the Company Store."
Yep.
You got wages and the stores took it away from you and you were stuck there.
So this was one of the last of the company-owned towns in the United States. I don't know if it was the last, but it was one of the last. So.
Fascinating presentation. Thank you.
Oh, thanks,
When
guys.
did the logging end there, Tim?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
When did they close the logging down there, the mill?
1956, they transitioned to cardboard boxes, and they basically shut the thing down, and everybody was out of work. People moved away, found jobs elsewhere. My dad moved back to the office in Los Angeles, where he worked for them up until the mid-70s. He ended up to the treasurer of the company. So.
You totally blew me away, Tim. This is fantastic.
Thank you.
Hey, Tim, how do you like using SketchUp for the architectural stuff?
I do. I love it. It's very intuitive for this kind of stuff. Okay, I want to get out of screen sharing here, guys. Where's Zoom again?
Hey, Tim,
Yeah.
I'm noticing there's a picture of several guys in the sorting shed, and it's all open air and open framework. And you can figure out how tall several of these guys were roughly, and average it out and figure out what the height is up to some of the beams there. I mean,
I've tried that, and I keep working with that to see if I can come up with, because sometimes you're standing behind it or in front of it, and it's a thought I've worked with, and I haven't got it quite figured out yet. I also can figure out some of the widths, because the lumber, I'm assuming most of this lumber that's cut is 16 feet. So that's kind of helped determine some things. Again, it's a pretty massive project, And I am whittling away at it. I am making progress, and any kind of suggestions I definitely appreciate.
Well, what do you think, guys, that we should tear up the current layout and just build this sawmill town to replace it? What do you
Hey,
think?
I'm all for that.
Well, I think we get to draw straws for who gets to knock down the towers in the refinery first.
Yeah.
Nice.
Well, we
Well,
can do
operations there, Marty.
we can do a Gomez Adams on it.
Right.
We can do that. Well, that was pretty good, Tim. That's the best presentation like this I've seen.
Well, thanks for tuning in, you guys. I appreciate it.
Are you guys familiar with the USGS historical topographic